Hello, everyone, and welcome to our final live event of the day. We are so excited to have had a wonderful day full of activities for family caregivers. Our campaign for Families for Depression Awareness Giving Tuesday 2020 is our Fill Your Cup campaign. I am Valerie Cordero, co-executive director of Families for Depression Awareness. And it's my pleasure to introduce everyone to Kaylee Wang. Kaylee is our wonderful guest for today. And our last activity has to do with healthy eating and just enjoying food as a mindfulness activity, the taste, the smell, and what is better than the taste of fresh bread, the smell of bread cooking during these times of COVID when everybody is home and trying to figure out ways of not going crazy. One of the things that has been really, really popular is doing sourdough starters. And so we are so fortunate to have Kaylee here today with us. She's going to walk us through how you make a sourdough starter. And I just want to remind everybody of a couple of things. You can go to our Facebook page in order to donate to our Fill Your Cup campaign. We are trying to raise $5,000, and the first $2,500 of that will be matched by our generous donors, so please donate. We also want to screen 1,000 people with our caregiver stress test. That stress test is free, and it offers you tools and resources for yourself, or you can take it for a loved one. So going to just remind you of those things as we get into our wonderful presentation today. I'm going to introduce Kaylee. Kaylee Wang is originally from Shanghai, China. She received her undergraduate degree from the University of Washington, Seattle, and her master's degree from Boston University. Kaylee has always had a passion for the culinary arts. In 2020, she began schooling at Le Cordon Bleu in London with a focus on patisserie and boulangerie. Did I say that right? So welcome, Kaylee. Kaylee also has a PowerPoint presentation, which I'm going to try to pull up. But as I'm doing that, I'll just give the floor over to you, Kaylee.
Okay. Thank you, Valerie, for introducing me. I'm Kaylee, and at the moment I'm in London, so everything's dark already. But hope you guys had a nice day, and I'm going to walk you guys through how to make sourdough starter in today's presentation, and some questions about it, some stigma on Instagram. Maybe you have been searching or looking at things. Okay, great. Yay, there was my PowerPoint. Are you gonna just play it, or can I control it in some way? Sorry, guys. And
I think I'm gonna have to control it. So we're just gonna do our best here, and I will try to make it work for you.
Yep. Okay. So I don't know how long have you guys been making sourdough, or you haven't started at all. But for me, I am a bread and pastry student. I only started this year after lockdown, to be honest, because I thought I didn't have the time to feed it. I thought it's going to be a complicated process, but turns out feeding, like nurturing a sourdough starter, it's sort of like a pet, like you're raising a pet, and it doesn't really, it's a strange feeling. Okay, I'm missing a flower. Okay, let's get to the next slide, please.
Sorry, I'm going to do my best here. It's not really working for me, so we'll do our best.
I guess you can just hit play. And
I tried. It's not working very well. We'll try it this way. Sorry, folks.
Okay, it's all right. So what is a sourdough? So sourdough is basically a bread made out of naturally yeast culture. Like the bread that you get from the supermarket or some bakeries, normally they would use what's that called? Baker's yeast or beer yeast? Not really beer yeast. I don't think it's beer yeast. So they're just like blocks of yeast, or I don't actually know what the kind of yeast that America would use. Is it powdered or blocked fresh yeast?
Probably
Okay,
powdered.
doesn't know. It's fine.
Probably powdered. Powdered.
You put in your flour and then mix with water and you make it bread. So sourdough isn't like that. It's sort of, as you can see on the picture, the darker starter, it's growing out of a natural environment. So we have yeast in the air. We have yeast everywhere. We have yeast in the flour already. And if you just feed it with a bit of oxygen and water, like any living things, it will grow. And that's what we're going to do today. So how it started, or how it's first recorded, was from Egypt, like 3,000 years ago, 4,000 years ago. A baker, she made a mistake. She made a batch of bread, which is unyeasted bread, so sort of like solid bread. But she forgot a little bit of that raw dough and put it aside. And a couple of days later, she found out, oh my God, the dough that I left on the side actually grows. So in that sense, the raw dough that she forgot picked up the yeast in the air, and over time, it sort of just rise, like how we make bread today. So that's how sourdough was discovered. That's how later, like the bread that we know today was started to develop into the not solid, unpleasant block of flour. We've got soft bread, we've got, texture and the crust, all that. Next slide. Am I going too fast? Okay, so sourdough starter. I noticed a lot of Instagram sourdough starter, they would look like the picture in the last slide. They will look a bit darker, very slimy sometimes, and they will have like lots of bubbles growing in the glass jar like this one. But actually in the world, like in France or in Italy or Spain, they all have very, very different ways to make their starter, to keep their starter. Like in the picture with the bag, sort of like it's a package. That's how some Italian baker would keep their sourdough starter in a dry package. They've got their reasons, but apparently it tastes better. I don't know, Italians. And we've got some sort of liquid starter, which is on the lower left side. That is possibly the very high moistured starter, and the French would use it to bake baguette. Which is amazing. I made it at school. It's just amazing. And we've got some starter that grows in, like, it grows up above the water, sort of. That's one of the ways to some advanced baker, they would tell if the starter is ready. So I'm just introducing the slides to tell you guys that you don't have to look for an Instagram picture and hope that your starter will look exactly like the Instagram picture. If it doesn't, it's fine. If it doesn't, it just means that maybe you got a different groups of yeast, like your family, the environment, the temperature in your family is different from the Instagram baker's environment. And every starter has their own character. They can look different. They can smell different. You just over time you just get to know it, and if you actually use it to bake bread, just takes a couple of try and fail. It's in a way it's nurturing, I would say. Yeah, I definitely made my first sourdough wasn't great, but over time it got better. So on the list there are just different names for the starter. Like stiff starter would be less water, pretty much. Like it will look like a dough. And the liquid starter would be looking like the picture on the lower left side. It would be like liquidy, slimy, just like a paste. And rye starter would look more like the picture in the previous slide. It would be darker because it's rye flour. And plain, the rest is just your own preference. And Asian flour starter is just a niche, I would say. But maybe some of the folks, if you guys are sensitive to gluten, you might consider using the Asian flour because they have lower gluten content. Yeah, that's it. The next one. Okay. Okay, so let's get into what equipment or what ingredients you might need if you want to start make sourdough today. The first one is a jar-shaped, is a silicone container, pretty much. I don't know if you can see it. Jeez. Yeah, just a glass jar or a plastic jar. It doesn't matter. Try not to make it so wide. Mine is a bit wide, actually. But yeah, it works. And it has to be clear. The reason it has to be clear is you want to see it. You want to see how it grows, how it rises. You want to observe the movement in your starter to determine when to feed it, or how you're going to store it, all the jazz. And the second is a scale, which is very, very important. Any sort of digital scale, or if you have one of those traditional scales. I've never seen those, but that's fine too. But a scale is very important, a food scale, because you want to make sure you know what you're putting into your starter, how much water, how much flour, and the rest. And a small spatula. I've got a small spatula here, which is quite small, actually, just this big. If you have a spoon, it's fine. If you want to use the back of the spoon as to stir it, it's fine. It doesn't need to be any specific material. I wrote it down. I recommend silicone. Basically, it's just non-sticky. You lose less. There's less wastage if you, if you only have like 20 grams of starter. If you use a very sticky wooden spatula, you might end up all the starter on your spatula. It's just a bit inconvenient. And then a marker or a tape or a rubber band. I've got a weird rubber band with me here. The reason for that is to put it on your jar so that you mark it when you first make it, then you can see where, geez, I don't know if you guys can see it. So if your starter starts from where the ribbon is, and it will rise, and you can see how much it grows. It usually is the most exciting part of making a starter. And okay, so those are the equipment that you need. Then let's talk about the ingredients. I wrote it down, the dark rye flour or the wholemeal rye flour, which is recommended. But if you only have bread flour or the plain flour, as you call it, I guess, it's fine too. The reason we recommend rye flour is it brings more flavor to the starter. Also, if it's a dark rye, it means that it's less processed. There might be a chance that there has more natural yeast in the rye flour already. So you might take less time to actually make your starter really active, and is also very flavorful, aromatic, all that. But if you only have like this, I've got this strong white flour, it's totally fine. Canadian white flour, I guess you can get it. Those are fine. And a thin slice of apple, grape, that is optional. I have some grape over here. That's the reason behind it. We're going to talk about it in the next slide. And a lot of patience, yes. the hardest thing I encounter making starter is to wait, because every time you have to wait for 24 hours or 12 hours, you need the patience. But the result is sort of interesting. So yeah. So next slide. Thank you. So we talked about what you need in your family to make the starter, but what the starter actually needs. So we are cultivating a sourdough starter. I've been saying the starter too much. But actually, we are trying to nurture a group of natural yeast cells, so for them to be alive and active and multiply in your little jar, potentially. So as a living being, as we are, like as a human being, we need water, we need food, oxygen, and hopefully the yeast will be staying in a very comfortable environment. So it would be 75 to 86 degree Fahrenheit. For us, it's just 24 degrees. The most ideal degree would be 24. I would say 22 to 28. That was a mistake on my end. Sorry, guys. But yeah, as long as you have all four, your starter would be totally fine. Even if for a small period of time, you're losing one of those, you can still revive it. You can still refeed it, bring it back to the ideal environment and give them food, water, oxygen, and a good temperature. Your starter won't die. They just won't die. Like once you get them started, they're quite resilient. So don't be afraid that, oh my God, it looks different. Oh, it smells weird. It's totally fine. Just refeed it. They're gonna get back to you. And the next one. The next slide, please. Thank you. Wait. All right. So this is the recipe I have for you guys. I realize there are a million other type of recipes out there because every baker that I know from my school or from my friends who has a starter, they all have different recipes, how they start or how they actually keep it. I chose this recipe because I think it's quite easy. In the first few days, you don't need to worry about discarding anything. You don't need to throw away your starter. Many recipes actually ask you to keep a certain bit of starter, then throw away a large amount of the mother dough, which is like completely fine because if in a real world, if in a bakery, potentially they will just use the starter to bake their bread and refeed it so that they have some left for the next day. But I understand in a household you can't really make bread every single day. So that is why this recipe actually has less food wastage, which is quite good for the environment in a sense. So I'm gonna walk you through a little bit about, okay, I'm gonna actually try to do it at the same time. You can see it. So we're gonna build the starter in this glass jar, and it's nothing really complicated. It's too simple, I would say. So day one, we need 10 grams of rye flour or plain flour, your choice. It's fine. But the idea is once you choose the flour, try to keep it consistent because the yeast culture that you're trying to grow doesn't like changes. They're like us, like we don't like changes. If you give it a certain type of flour, try to keep it to the same type of flour every day, every time that you feed it. Then they would grow into a stable, active little yeast package that you have in the fridge or in your house. So 10 grams of rye flour, I already weighed it out in a little tub, so I'm just gonna put it in. there's my 10 gram of rye flour. And also 10 gram of water. So it's very important that flour and water are the same quantity. Okay. This is just, yeah. Now I'm just gonna mix it. I would recommend mix it vigorously, because if you are mixing it too gently, you're not actually introducing more oxygen into the mixture. When we do this, we want to have as much oxygen into the flour water mixture as possible. But you don't have to do it like half for like 2 hours. Just 30 seconds would be good. And that'll be it. And that looks quite gross, just like a gray paste. I'm using a fairly dark rye flour, so it looks like a paste, slimy paste. Now what you do is, if you have a lid for your container, that's great. Just loosely cover it. I'm not even pressing it down. You don't want to press it down too hard, because remember, the 4 element, one of them is oxygen. You want the starter to have enough oxygen to breathe, to have the reaction. So you just loosely cover it. The only purpose of it is just to prevent dirt going into the container. Oh, by the way, the container needs to be clean. Yeah, needless to say. And then you wait for 24 hours. Barely anything would happen unless something magical about the grapes or your apple. So the choices of grapes. So the story is, many bakers, they would, when they are starting to build a new starter, they were throwing some grapes in there, or a thin slice of apple with the skin in there. The reason is to give it more sugar, to like a boost, to have the yeast to have more food. And potentially, if it's grapes, if they're grown organically, without any pesticides, there's a chance that they have many natural yeast on the skin of the grape already. And if you just put it in the mixture, it just like fasten your process pretty much. So it's a good way to start the yeast culture. The way you do it is sort of just crush it. I don't want to do it now because it's gonna be messy. Yeah, I can do it. Just crush it. You want to leave the skin in there, and ideally organic. You don't want your starter to have weird stuff in there. You just do this and put it in, so it's in there. And you can put 2 grapes in there if you want. It's like totally fine. So it's in there now, and I'm just gonna mix it in. And don't worry that it looks weird, because like 2 giant grapes and a tiny bit of starter. It's just how it is. And if you're making your first loaf would have a little bit of grape in there. It would taste great. And okay, so you cover it, you wait for 24 hours. It's better that you record a time, like if you decided to do it at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and the next day, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, you're gonna refeed your starter. As I said, they don't like changes. If you do it consistently at the same time, with the same type of flour, preferably in the same temperature at 24 degrees all the time, they will be active in no time. And okay, let's go to second day. Second day is the same. 10 grams of rye flour and 10 grams of water. Yeah, then just mix it. actually mix it really well. You don't want any dry like flour visible in the tub. And again, cover it loosely. Leave it somewhere warm at 24 degrees Celsius, or the 780 degrees Fahrenheit in your house. Leave it for 24 hours. Continue, as the recipe said, on day 3, you do the same, but usually after day 3 or even after day 2, you would already observe, well, obviously I don't have it now, but you would have observed some sort of small bubbles on the bottom or on the sides of your container. They're really small. That's when you know that your starter is actually, they are growing. They are starting to be active. And on day 4 and 5, I believe it's the same thing. No, actually, day 4 is the same thing, but day 5. So that's when we start to have a little bit of wastage, as we say. But I actually, okay, that's a different topic, and some people might think I'm weird, but anyways. So day 5, the recipe says weigh out 25 gram of starter of day 4. So day 4 is a starter, is this. So you want to weigh out 25 gram of your mother starter. So that means that you have some wastage. You can't just throw it away unless you have a giant container in your house, and the starter will just grow bigger and bigger and bigger, which could be problematic. You can just throw it away, or you can cook it like a pancake. That's what I was saying. People will think I'm weird, but you can really try it. It's it's acquired taste, but it's a way to reduce wastage. I mean, okay, so you keep 25 gram of the starter, then you add 25 gram of water and 25 grams of flour. Then you do the same thing. You mix it vigorously. Then you keep it for 24 hours. And on so basically everything from day 5 is the same thing as day 5. The only difference is after day 5, your starter would have more bubbles. They would look a lot like the picture I showed you guys in the previous slides, and they will double the size or triple, even quadruple size for some of the really active starters. Then you have to, by then you have to start to observe when you want to feed it, or if it's not really strict, to be honest. Some of the baker would say you have to feed it once it starts to sink, because it will, imagine like your starter, it will double the size, and then after they just keep they've got enough food, they've eaten all the flour and water that you feed it, so they've got less active, then they start to calm down a bit. Some baker would say, oh, just feed it right after. But I know that you guys won't be like looking at your starter 24 hours. So it's actually not too strict, as long as you feed it at the same time, according to the same recipe. Your starter would totally be fine. Also, one of the question or concern I hear people say or ask me a lot would be, what if I don't make that much bread? What if I forgot to feed my starter for 2 days? Or what if I have to travel? So that means that you can't really keep a consistent schedule when you are feeding your starter. But okay, so I want to be clear. This recipe on this slide from day 1 to day 7, that sort of needs to be done really consistently, because that's how you started. That's how you make it consistent. So after you've reached day 7 and you have a good feeling about your starter being, it's quite, active, and it looks a bit like Instagram starters. After that, if you decided you don't need much bread, you don't want to feed it every day, it's a waste of flour. From that day on, you can decide to feed it and store in the fridge, tightly covered with cling film or with the tub, with the cover that comes with the tub, and store in the fridge for a week or 2. That's totally fine. It won't die. It just like sort of make the yeast dormant and just make them sleep instead of being active and crazy and multiply. They just sleep. And if you decided to make bread out of it, you can just take the starter out of the fridge, let it come back to room temperature, refeed it according to the recipe here, then wait for a little bit, let it get back to the active level, then you can use it to bake your bread. So people don't have to. I've heard story that people travel with their starters. That is a bit crazy. You can leave it in the fridge for 2 weeks. It's gonna be okay. And also, I have a favorite London baker over here. They did an experiment. They leave their starter in the sun in the summer. I know summer in London isn't that hot, but they specifically did that experiment to see how resilient a starter actually is. So the starter ended up cracking, drying up, smelling bad, but they managed to rescue it. We managed to revive it anyways. So I just think that you don't have to feel really trapped by a tub of water and flour at home that you feel like you have every 2 o'clock in the afternoon. You have to go back home and feed your starter. You don't have to do it. You can keep it in the fridge. But the result coming from the starter is once you make bread out of it, it's just amazing. And it's more nutritious because it's from natural yeast and just helps your body to absorb the nutritions a bit easier, faster. What else do I want to talk about? Is there any questions? I think I've finished my...
Well, I have a question, Kaylee. And we will, it takes people a minute to be able to type questions in because there's a little bit of a delay. So while we're giving people the opportunity to write in our Facebook page under this video, write their questions in, I don't know how. So first of all, how do you know it's done and ready to be baked, and how do you bake it if you don't actually have a bread maker at home, like a thing? I know that people own bread makers that you plug in and it'll make your bread. So how would you make it without one of those?
Okay, I've never used a bread maker, so no bread maker questions to me. I don't know how to use it. Okay, your first question, how do you know it's done? I would suggest that you were asking, how do you know when you can actually use the starter to make a bread? Yeah. So from the recipe, after day 7, you can use it. You can use it straight away. But every sourdough recipe is a bit different. There are bakers who would use the starter straight away into their dough to make a bread. Other baker would actually take a bit of the starter, refeed it in a different tub, and sort of reactivate in a different tub and just use it in the bread. Okay, I'm not saying it very clearly. The simple idea is, after day 7, if you want to make a bread with 500 gram flour, you want to use 20 to 30% in the 500 flour to be your starter. So if you want to use 500 gram of flour, you want to use 150 grams of starter if you have it. So that would be the ratio that you want to consider when you're actually using your starter to make the sourdough bread. But as I said, like there are millions of recipes on the internet. You can just pick one and follow the recipe. The starter I'm teaching us to make it today should be ready to use for any recipes, at least any Instagram recipes online, because it is 100% hydration. Starter is a pretty common ratioed starter. It's not the ones the special ones, like the packaged dry ones or the starter that floats above the water. It's not that kind of stuff. So the recipe today is quite basic, it's simple, and it should be suitable for any of the recipes that if you guys try to find online. Yeah. Oh, what's the other question? How to make the sourdough bread? If you don't have a bread starter, you don't have a bread machine, you just grab a bowl. I have a huge bowl here. Okay, it's a metal bowl. You get your flour, your water, your starter, however much you want to use it, 20 to 30%. You get it in there, mix. And I would say making sourdough bread, it is at least a 2-day job. It takes a long time to make a proper sourdough bread.
It's quite a commitment, huh?
So it is taking more time to rise. It's taking more time to develop the flavor. It tastes better, as everybody knows it, but it takes 2 days. You spend the first day mixing the flour, giving it strength, letting it rise, and store it in the fridge to develop flavor. Then the next day you bake it. So this is how crazy sourdough can be.
Kaylee, we have another question.
Okay.
Do you recommend feeding the starter during winter time?
Okay, so I would assume that you guys have heating in your house. I hope you do, because otherwise it's just, the good luck. So if you have a heating in your house, try to get like if you have a thermometer, that would be great. Like get what's the temperature in your house actually is. As long as it's between 22 to 26, so that would be 75 to 80 Fahrenheit, a degree Fahrenheit. You can totally do it. Try not to have it too hot. That's the one of the problems. And also try not to keep it in a very cold area environment, because nothing would happen. The yeast would be like in the fridge. It would be sleeping. It won't be multiplied. They won't be active. Yeah.
Okay, good. Well, I think those are all of our questions. Thank you so much, Kaylee, for being with us today and giving us a great recipe for a healthy sourdough starter. We appreciate your time, and thank you everyone who has been watching and been with us through our day of activities. If you're on our Facebook page, go ahead and also go over to the donate button and support our organization. We also encourage you to take our caregiver stress test and to also watch some of the other videos. If you mentioned our videos, if you missed some of our videos from earlier today, go back and watch. But from London, Kaylee joined us from London. Thank you so much. It's your bedtime, I'm sure. So we appreciate you, and thank you everyone for watching.
Thank you, Valerie. Bye.